Ever since 1808, Spain has been divided into two socially different groups. On the one hand, a weak progressive bourgeoisie that was actively trying to dismantle the structures of the old regime by getting out new political and economic inactivities to modernize and industrialize the country. On the other hand, landed oligarchies that were dominant in terms of political influence, opposed to industrialization and modernization. Spain still had a predominantly agrarian economy. Peasants and the laborers were exploited. In 1868, thanks to the general discontent amongst peasants, the middle class and the military, a pronunciamiento led by Francisco Serrano and Juan Prim would dethrone Isabel II and make her go into exile. A new liberal monarch, Amadeo de Saboya, was elected in 1871, but because of multiple problems, including the Cantonal Revolution and an insurrection in Cuba, he resigned in 1873. After that, Spain would be a republic for a short period of time until 1874, when the monarchy would be restored with Alfonso XII, accompanied by a political system based on the orchestrated exchange of power between the main political parties, the Liberal Party, led by Praxedes Mateo Sagasta, and the Conservative Party, led by Antonio Cánovas del Castillo. This phenomenon could only be achieved with the help of caciques, who manipulated the elections. Protests against system by monarchists, socialists, and communists would end with the assassination of Cánovas in 1897. Another opposition to the system would be the Partido Reformista created by Melquiades Álvarez in Asturias in 1912. Apart from that, another Republican, Alejandro Lerroux, would rise to popularity through demagogy. All the hostility and lack of stability in Spain ended with a coup d'etat in 1923 by Miguel Primo de Rivera, who legalized the anarchist movement, made an agreement with the UGT so it would have a monopoly in trade union activities, and named Largo Caballero state councillor. His dictatorship would last until 1930, when he resigned because once again there were too many problems and too little stability in Spain. New elections were convoked. The left-wing parties primarily won in the city, while right-wing parties mostly won in rural areas, which meant that caciques still had a good deal of power. Alfonso XIII was forced to resign, and Spain began its Second Republic, with a provisional government. The 14th of April, Coronel Macià, leader of Esquerra Republicana, declared an independent Catalonian Republic, which prompted a delegation from Madrid to cede Catalonia the Statute of Autonomy. In June of 1931, Manuel Azaña closed the Academia General de Zaragoza, and that would make Francisco Franco his enemy. The following elections were convoked in the same month. A coalition was formed between the winners, the Socialists, and the left-wing Republicans. Lerroux's Centre Party would start to become more anti-socialist and more conservative. In autumn, the Cortes had elaborated the new constitution. It was as secular, democratic, reformist, and liberal as the Republicans and Socialists wanted. But Spain's most powerful groups, landowners, the church, the military, and businessmen, were completely against it. The police brutally repressed workers' and peasants' revolts. In 1932, José Sanjurjo tried to stage a coup d'etat, but it failed. A new party would emerge, CEDA, created by José María Gil Robles, which was a collective of more than 50 right-wing parties. It would be the one to win the next elections, the ones in 1933, when Spanish women voted for the first time. Socialists believed the elections had been manipulated, taking into consideration the caciques' abuse of power to gain more votes. Alejandro Lerroux was named president of the Spanish government. In March, a representation of the Partido Carlista and the Renovación Española visited Mussolini, who would promise to procure money and weapons for a future uprising. Falange Española fused with Las Juntas de Ofensiva Nacional Sindicalista. It was the party the majority of monarchists placed their trust in. Through 1934, tensions between the left and the right increased, and street fights could occur constantly. Lerroux resigned early in the year because Alcalá Zamora refused to sign amnesty for the generals who participated in Sanjurjo's failed coup d'etat. Communists and socialists joined in the Frente Popular to combat fascism in Spain. They would win the elections the 16th of February. The military started to conspire against it. Alcalá Zamora was forced to resign, as he didn't have support from neither of the sides. Tensions inside the government also started to grow. Azaña was named president of the government, but he really didn't do anything as he wasn't interested in politics that much anymore. So Santiago Casares Quiroga substituted for him. But Prieto and him weren't on good terms, and that made the republic weaker.
Another Sanjurjada was in the making, but this time the leader was Emilio Mola, and he wasn't going to commit the same mistakes as before. Suspicious generals were sent to different places in Spain. Mola was sent to Pamplona, which was a bad idea, as it was a great place to organize his plans. Franco was sent to Canarias. José Sanjurjo would later join the operation and place himself as the new leader of the conspiration. An evening in early July, José Castillo, a Republican official, appeared dead. A few days later, Calvo Sotelo was kidnapped and assassinated. Thanks to a coincidence, Franco was able to arrive to Morocco and stir up the revolt. When the news got to Madrid, they weren't given too much importance, but it would be the start of the civil war.
Military authorities, led the Falangist Escuadras Negras, sparked panic amongst the population, forcing leftists out of their house at night to shoot them to death in the cemetery. One of those victims was the renowned Federico García Lorca, who was known to be a left-wing moderate. General Joaquín Fanjul tried to take control of Madrid with the help of some Falangists, but they were defeated by the Republicans, who killed several rebel officials. Mola and the other conspirators were waiting for Sanjurjo to return from his exile in Portugal, but on his way back he suffered a fatal plane crash. With Godet, Fanjul and Sanjurjo dead, the only other leader of the Falangists, Franco, would be very difficult to surpass, as Mola had Republican contacts and the rebels didn't like that. Soon enough, after Francisco Franco's petitions, they were receiving soldiers, planes and weaponry from Mussolini and Hitler. Things weren't looking good for Republicans. They had given up control of most of their territory. The rebels had the upper hand thanks to what they had received from other countries, and because they had more military forces and better ones, at that. Then, in a moment of despair, Republicans started receiving help from the USSR. Stalin stepped in to send planes, weaponry, and military officers to help Republicans. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, the right-wing political forces started taking measures to stop communism from spreading to their countries. Meanwhile, the left warned that fascism was a threat. Britain wanted to avoid another war, so they tried to remain neutral, implementing the non-interventionist policy, which tried to neutralize the war and consider both sides equally reprehensible, but they still sympathized with the nationalist side. As France was dependent on Great Britain's support after World War I, they opted for non-intervention as well. The US also refused to interfere, but this impaired the Republican side significantly more. In 1934, the USSR decided to pact with France and Great Britain, so Stalin tried to help the Republican faction without losing his newly found allies. Hitler was afraid of Spain becoming communist, so he used the conflict as preparation for an European war. Meanwhile, Mussolini supported the nationalists, as he thought their victory would mean an opportunity to weaken the UK.
The advance of the nationalist faction exposed the insufficiencies of Girard's government and led to the formation of a new Popular Front on September 4th, with broader political representation. On November 1st, the rebel troops reached Madrid to destroy its defenses, so the government fled to Valencia. Luckily for them, the rebels suffered a delay and gave them time to receive help from the USSR and the international brigades. As Madrid went through more assaults, they decided to evacuate the prisons from a fear that the soldiers among the prisoners would join the rebel army. The convicts were either killed, moved to another jail, or freed. Moreover, Primo de Rivera was shot to death on November 20, 1936. Franco remained optimistic as Italy and Germany recognized the Junta Nacional de Burgos as legitimate and Oviedo was no longer besieged. Madrid kept being attacked while the Republican government struggled to receive supplies, paying 500 tons of gold to the USSR. Italy sent 80,000 men to the south, Malaga fell, and they tried to take Madrid again, winning Guadalajara. Francoist repression killed 180,000 people, spread rumors about supposed atrocities committed by their adversaries, and terrorized the citizens through radio emissions. Loyalist women were usually humiliated by shaving their heads, feathering, beating, and torturing them as a response for the liberation movement created in the Republic. Franco was named head of state and he imposed his authority over both the right and the left. His brother-in-law, Ramón Serrano Suñer, conceived a complete and formal government structure the dictator would adopt, joining Falange and the Comunión Tradicionalista Carlista. His rivals from the army were eliminated one by one, including Mola, whose death was commented upon by Hitler, who thought it had been a crucial loss for Spain. Francoism was legitimized by the Catholic Church, and they were rewarded with full control over education. Hitler and Mussolini were seen as role models, which led to the re-emergence of antisemitism, the attempt to eradicate leftist thought, and the establishment of a monarchy. During 1936, the Republican areas were controlled by terrorizing members of the clergy and right-wing political parties, killing almost 50,000 civilians. This damaged their reputation abroad when trying to obtain international support. The Republic faced a dilemma. Was it more important to prioritize the war or the revolution?
The tensions between bourgeois Democrats and moderate socialists on one side and revolutionary proletariats on the other provoked hostility from the great powers towards the Republic. Collectivism spread through rural areas with scarcity of crops, which the politicians did not know how to handle and ended up taking measures seen as counter-revolutionary. Even with all its flaws, the Republic was seen as an opportunity for an egalitarian future. Women started having access to the military and different working spaces, although they were still mostly in charge of the home duties and were mistreated by their comrades. During August 1936, communists worked to defend the legitimate institutions chosen by the Republic. Largo Caballero ended up forming a government with both Republican and Workers' parties and later members from the CNT, as he wanted to achieve a unified power and a trained army to maintain the Republic. Largo Caballero's relationship with communists deteriorated rapidly as he realized their contributions were attached to dictatorial methods. In Catalonia, the Generalitat was conflicted with the CNT and POUM, which was seen as an opportunity to blame Largo Caballero, who resigned and was replaced by Juan Negrín. The communists attacked POUM, and it was illegalized. The CNT was repressed as well. During March 1937, Emilio Mola planned an assault on the Basque Country, including Guernica, which they falsely affirmed had been bombarded by the Basques themselves. In May, the rebel troops surrounded Bilbao, which would fall a month later. The Francoist forces won power across the north and united a huge army. Meanwhile, the Republicans had constant internal disputes and did not have enough troops. At the beginning of 1938, Franco confirmed his political dominance, and as the Republicans struggled and the international brigades left, they obtained through a series of battles full control over Spain. Until Franco died, he kept Spain divided between the victors and the defeated, claiming that the latter were inferior, and that they needed to be purified. Franco's dictatorship followed a process of national reconstruction, by executing, torturing, humiliating, imprisoning, and forcing the defeated to go into exile. It was usual for widows and spouses of prisoners to be raped by higher-ups who committed an abuse of power. Not only that, but they were also robbed of their houses and possessions. Many of them were living in misery, and frequently they sold themselves on the streets to make money. Franco used that argument to prove that Republican women were a source of corruption and indignity. Prisoners were divided into recoverable and not recoverable. The first ones were re-educated and exempted from prison, and the later ones were executed. Franco made Spain an autarky. The Patronato para la Redención de Penas turned Republicans into slaves and provided forced labor to construct public works. For example, el Canal de Guadalquivir, el Alcázar de Toledo, el Arco de la Victoria at the entrance into Ciudad Universitaria, and the biggest symbol of them all, the imposing cross in el Valle de los Caídos.